Welcome, everybody, to the Wednesday Wellness Debrief. My name is Brittany, your host, and I'm joined here by the lovely Mikayla. Say hi, Mikayla.
Hi. I'm so happy to be here, girl.
I'm so happy that you came to join me. Even I made it through all of the illnesses and ailments. I was determined to be here to interview because I
Mm.
was really excited to interview you pertaining to wellness, pertaining to one of the nine pillars of wellness, which is environmental wellness and spiritual wellness.
Yay.
So, starting with your journey outside of your business and all the everyday hustle and bustle, I just want to know, who is Mikayla?
Girl, that's a great question. And who is Mikayla? I think that a lot of my core essence is 100% rooted in my faith in God. I am really into my relationship with God, but not in a more like a holistic approach, I would say. So, who is Mikayla? I am a wife. I am a daughter. I love Jesus. I love tequila. All of those things. I have a really passion about family. It's just me and my husband, but I imagine someday that we'll have kids and I want to be very present with them. Yeah, I think that I try to be a great friend, really just holding space for what people need, I suppose, being really patient and understanding. I don't know if this is answering your question.
No, this is who you are. You're giving me the foundation. I want the
Yeah.
listeners to know who you are. And as we build upon it, they
Yeah.
get to know your foundation and why you're inspired through the different
Yeah,
phases of
yeah, that's
wellness,
good. I
how
love
you
the
impact people.
the way that you're phrasing it. The way that you phrase it though. Who is Mikayla? I'm like, like I like obviously thought about that, but I've never thought about it in like a just like a blanket statement. I'm like, oh, that's a great question. I love that. But yeah, interest in, health and wellness and family and spirituality and all of those good things. I hope that was a good answer.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Is there a specific memory or experience that rooted your passion for both nature and spirituality?
I think as far as nature goes, I've always been like interested in nature. As far as like who is Mikayla, kind of those things tying together. I currently live in Orlando, Florida, but I'm actually from California. So I grew up there until I was about 10 or 11, but it was long enough to experience like California culture, right? So there's this melting pot of culture and of food and all of that stuff. And in California, the weather is much nicer than here in Florida. So we did a lot of like outdoorsy things, right? So we did, bike rides and hiking and all of that. And through those experiences, even just, being 10 years old or having 10 years of that, I think that my interest of nature kind of started then. Even with gardening, we actually tried to have a garden when I was younger in my childhood home. It was unfortunately too low to the ground. My mom has some
Mm.
mobility issues, which actually affects how I garden now. I try to do a lot of raised planters that everyone can access. But yeah, so I think the interest in nature started at a very young age, just as a product of my environment actually and the surroundings that I had. As far as like I think that you had asked about, faith or spirituality or things like that. I think that that foundation, yes, was started early. Again, a product of my environment with my family. Like, we went to church and things when I was younger, but I don't think I really had a relationship with God and a true understanding and all of that until much later in life, until I was really like, being my own person, I guess. So yeah, just experiencing different traumas and things throughout my life, I really started to lean more heavily into that, holistic spirituality, faith-based type of thing. Probably more so teens, 20s, things like that.
As most of us do, as we transition outside of our family households and we start experiencing
Right.
the world,
Right.
it is kind of like you have to find a faith or believe in something.
But I do really value that, like, I don't really feel like my parents ever really like pushed, belief, value, anything like that. Like it was encouraged, but it was never really like, like you will believe this. But it was nice that once I was kind of, finding my own way, I had that as a reference point and it was a very conscious decision of like, okay, well, this is something that like I'm choosing for myself, or this aligns with, how I want to carry myself in the world and things like that.
It's important for a lot of parents to let their children discover religion, God, spirituality
Right.
on their own terms. Give
Yeah,
them the foundation, but still, if
right.
things will come around. Like for me, again, I grew up in the church,
Yeah.
and I still have that foundation regardless of where I go.
Right.
34 years on this planet, it's
Right.
still an integral part of my life and kind of like the North Star, as I call it,
Yeah.
for
So
yourself.
there's that Bible verse. I not that great at quoting Bible verses. Just a disclaimer in this interview. I can quote it, but I don't know where it is. But anyway, there's one that talks about train up a child in the right way and they'll never depart from their ways. I feel like that's what it is. It's like, if your family, gives you the reference point, no matter what your journey looks like, ups, downs, roller coaster, whatever, like you'll always have that reference. And at some point in your life, if you're like, let me revisit that, like it's always there. I think that's definitely how it was for me, for sure.
No, and that makes you who you are. That sets
Yeah.
your foundation as you as the journey.
Yeah.
From moving on to Mikayla's journey, on to founding Planted Prayer Garden Consulting from a concept to reality. I know as a business owner, there's a lot of things that come into play.
Yeah, girl.
A lot of parts that people, and again, I work in 9 to 5, that
Yeah.
typically you do not see
Yeah.
on the business side. I think everyone sees like the nice magazine articles or things written about you, but don't see necessarily the hustle to get there. But starting a business is never about the business. It is often about solving a problem or meeting a need that we have felt personally in our own lives. For your business, Planted Prayer Garden Consulting, how did that come to life for you?
Well, first and foremost, I would just like to say shout out to you, the 9 to 5 girly, also the entrepreneur spirit, like doing the things. I know exactly that there's so much going on. So shout out to you for doing it. But for me, how did it come into fruition, or what, was the greater purpose? So can we dive a little deep here? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I started gardening. I actually haven't mentioned this at all. So I actually am also a healthcare professional. I do work a 9 to 5, so to speak. It's really a 6 to 3. I'm always up at 4:30. It's horrible. But anyway, so I also work full time, and I do anesthesia. That's like my main thing. And I had the honor and the privilege to work through COVID, and it was very hard. Just being in the hospital every day, doing surgeries on, patients that were already very sick. And then on top of it, to have the whole pandemic aspect of it, it was very stressful. Mm-hmm. So although I started gardening kind of like earlier in my life at some point, like I really took an interest in it. And like, this is, my little safe place during COVID. And I also realized at that point, I don't know if you guys remember that there was like, everyone was just panicking, oh, where are we going to get groceries? Where are we going to get toilet paper? It was like a whole thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a vegetarian, and I was like, why don't I just grow my own food? Like, I already like to garden. You know what I mean? Like, I was doing flowers and things like that. I'm like, why don't I just grow my own food? So I really dived deep into that. And then I thought about the business aspect of it, of like, wait a minute, like, if I know how to do this, why doesn't everyone know how to do this? Like, how can I empower other people to feel the same mental satisfaction that I was getting? Because it was honestly more of like a mindfulness practice, the gardening itself. But how do I help people receive that and just like the calm and the peace that comes with gardening, but also the nutritional benefits and the wellness benefits of having produce that you grew yourself, exactly where it comes from, that it's not sprayed with, pesticides and chemicals, all of those things. So as far as like the greater mission, I really just want to, empower people to have the tools and the knowledge to grow their own food, to be able to literally pick out a carrot in their garden and wash it off and puree it for their baby. Like that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do myself when I do have kids. I want to teach other people how to have that too. So I feel like access to food and access to good food, nutritious food, nutrient dense, chemical free, organic, all of those things. It is like everyone deserves that. So I want to just help people achieve that without having to rely so heavily on, commercial grocery stores or processed things and things like that. I think I went a little bit on a tangent there, but yeah.
No, especially, and I have some friends and they have birth children. And the concerns of the food they're putting into their babies' mouths. Right. One, and she does my eyebrows. She was talking about how she talks about how like she wakes up early, and her partner, and they have like a baby food maker, and they make their own baby food.
Yep.
Even talking about the shortage of formula,
right?
And then all those recalls on the shortages when they got the shortages back, all the chemicals that were in baby formula,
right?
So being cautious of, unfortunately, going to the store, that should be on the top of everybody's brain.
Right. And I think
honestly,
it's so mind-boggling to me, because this is kind of where my foundation, my faith, all of that kind of gets combined with gardening, because I'm like, wait a minute, if we're going to talk about God and God created everything and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wait, so I don't really think that God put all these chemicals in our food. You know what I mean? Like, if we're just point blank, like, I think that if we're thinking about, like, okay, well, if God created the heavens and the earth and plants and all that stuff, like, all of that was just, like, from the earth. Like, even regardless of what it is that you believe, I actually never, like, push my religion on people, or, relationship. I don't like that word religion. But either way, regardless of what you believe, at the end of the day, like, there's a seed and it goes in the ground and it's watered and there's sun and there's, right? So, like, why are we adding all of these other things into it? So that is part of, like, the motivation of just, like, really, getting back to, like, the roots, like the, I used to say, I'm like, take back your plate, right? Like, really just being more in control of, like, eating food just the way that it was intended. That's all I want to do. I don't want all of these pesticides. I don't want to have all of my food imported from another country when, like, if there is a way for me to grow some, maybe not all, I don't have a massive farm, right? But if there is a way for me to grow some of my own produce in my backyard, then, like, yes, I want to do that. And I want to teach other people how to do that, because they deserve to do that too. So yeah, that's a huge part of it. There's a Bible verse, again, I'm not that great at quoting it. There's a Bible verse. It's Jeremiah 29:5, and that is the foundation for my business, really. It says to build houses, plant gardens, and eat their produce. And it just, to me, feels like this, essentially like this, like, call to action, right? Of, like, hey, like, you're going to build your house or wherever it is that you have, you're going to, plant a garden and eat from it. I'm like, yeah, I will do that. And that means we should all do that.
We should. Oh, and then, so for you, and I guess kind of piggybacking to the next question, what gap did you see that inspired you to create this? So when you went to the grocery store, kind of looking at the back of the ingredient box, you're just like, I don't want to put this on my body. This is not something that I aspire.
And really, like, if we think about your weekly grocery shopping, usually there's some, like, chickens and, beef and all of that things. And like I said, I just don't eat meat anymore. I used to. It was great. Still smells delicious. But I was just like, well, if I'm already into gardening, I'm like, there has to be a way for me to grow some of this at home. And I was thinking about actually the cost of groceries at the time, because I was like just starting in my profession. I'm like, I don't have a great budget. But yeah, I was thinking about that. And honestly, I don't think so much about the cost anymore. I mean, I consider it, but I'm really just interested in having nutrient dense food that I feel more confident knowing exactly what is in it, right? Especially, like, when I'm growing my plants from seed, like, I know exactly that I'm using an organic seed and it's planted in organic soil. I'm not using any harsh chemicals to make it make the plant any bigger than it needs to be. It's just like, no, like, this is just, like, I don't know, the basics. Back to the basics, I would say.
Back to the foundation.
Yeah. I mean, and you think about it, like, not more than 100 years ago, everyone was growing something, right? Like, maybe not a full garden or but it was, people had little salsa garden. Like, oh, we're going to make dinner and we're going to grab tomatoes, and maybe that's just what we have on our plate, with whatever else that we're cooking, or having herbs available. A lot of people want to put fresh herbs in their food, right? You go to the store, you get those little packs, they're like $4, right? I'm like,
so expensive, and they expire so quickly.
They do, and it's like, or we could just buy a seed packet for 99 cents, $1, and have a ton of seeds. You know what I mean? So some of that was 100% like the motivation in the grocery store, just feeling that frustration. I do, if I obviously, like, I still have to go to the grocery store. It's not like I have, like, every single vegetable and fruit that I want to eat in my garden. But when I do shop in organically. Like, I like to get organic fruits and vegetables and things, and that is expensive, so for whatever it is that I can grow in my backyard for, our season here in Florida, I'm like, oh, let me try that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So, talking about the practical side of your business, if someone right now is listening and they love what you're offering, they're like, oh my goodness, I want to start gardening in the back. What kind of services does your
Sure,
service or
yeah.
offer?
So we do garden consultations, we do installations, we do virtual events. Actually, I host webinars every now and then. I haven't done one in a while, but I host webinars. I do virtual consultations, in-home garden consultations, workshop events that are in person. Those are so much fun. You have to come out to one of them. Next time, I will make sure that you're there. But yeah, I love doing workshops. Those are super fun. I actually usually have like mocktails, charcuterie, and then, but there's also like an actual lesson or activity that we're doing. So I'll do like an herb garden workshop or microgreens where you're getting a chance to practice some of the skills that I'm teaching at the workshop. So those are fun. And then like I said, have like online services. So that covers what we do.
Okay, so you have an array of things to offer the
Different
people.
things, yeah. Especially like what I'm noticing is that there are so many people outside of my direct, circle, my local circle that I would like to reach. So that's where like my online things come more into play, like our virtual consultations or our webinars, and then online courses and all of that. It's more for the people that are not direct in my vicinity. But yeah, locally here, it's a lot of home garden installations and workshops and things like that.
Awesome. So, moving on from planted prayer gardening consulting to the connection between nature and spiritual growth. When people think about connecting with nature, they often imagine a big outdoor adventure, very much. I went to Portland with my husband, and Portland is gorgeous. And being out west, it's a completely different lifestyle than living on the East Coast. I will admit to that. I think people think like nothing and backpacking and camping and all those other things, but sometimes connecting with nature can just be being in your backyard. Wow. So for you, how does the act of nurturing a plant mirror the act of nurturing oneself?
I love this question. And it's funny because even as I think about it, it just brings me so much peace. I think that nurturing a plant is a way to kind of symbolize nurturing yourself, because you have to show up for your plants, right? And in that practice of showing up for your plants and watering and, adding compost and all of that, it is also showing up for yourself in a sense that you're nurturing, hey, this plant is going to feed me eventually, right? And so as I take the time, because a lot of us don't have a lot of time, right? We're busy, we're moving, we're going, blah, blah, blah. But as I can prioritize taking the time to nurture this plant, I'm also prioritizing time to be outside, to just listen to the waterfall that I have in my garden. Well, it's a pool, but still. I'll listen to, the waterfall and making sure that that plant is getting the nutrients that it needs. And then it makes me more intentional about like, well, am I getting the nutrients that I need, right? So I'm showing up and I'm watering this plant. I'm like, let me drink some water, right? And even just seeing like the evolution of growth, right? So we'll start with this tiny seed. Again, here's another little Bible verse. And like, I should really next time I'll have to write these all out. But there's a Bible verse that talks about like a faith the size of a mustard seed, right, can move mountains. And so when you have those kind of moments, you're like, okay, you're planting literally a mustard seed or a collard green seed, and they're the tiniest little things, right? And you get to see the evolution of it sprouting and growing. And now it's this huge head of mustard leaves, you're like, oh, I get it. You know what I mean? Like kind of like connecting the actual evolution of that plant's growth to maybe your own life, right? Saying like, oh, well, I believed for something that I wanted to happen in my life. And it was this I had the smallest amount of faith. I wasn't even really sure if this was going to come to pass. And then to see that blessing kind of like blossom, right? So I think that nurturing a plant, nurturing your garden is this act of also inwardly nurturing yourself. I think that also having the practice of getting out into your garden, it would be daily, but again, people are busy. Even a couple times a week, getting out into your garden and just taking 10 minutes to just like ground yourself, like maybe leave your phone inside and just like sit there and marvel at the plants. I think the mindfulness aspect of it was really a huge part. It still is, but when I first started gardening, that was it. I was having these days at the hospital that were really dark, right? Like I know that we don't look back there that often, but like COVID was tough, especially all the healthcare heroes, like, shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for everything. But I would come home from the hospital feeling like sometimes very deflated, right? And I would see the seed that I planted a couple weeks ago, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got a flower. Like something's happening. And it almost symbolized to me like, in the midst of all like the darkness, all the death that was happening in COVID, I'm like, but there is still life. Like my flowers are blooming, and like it takes some time, but it's also working on like my patience, right? Because I'm like, if I'm patient and I nurture this plant or this seed and it's growing and there's life. Another thing too is even maintaining your garden or your plants and having to prune away things, like prune away some of the leaves. Like I feel like that's also a way that reminds me to take care of myself. Because as I have a tomato plant and it's growing and it's got all these leaves and it's like, well, they look really healthy, but are they adding any value to the plant? Right? And they're like, no, okay, well, let me start to prune away some of the leaves. And it reminds me to kind of look in my life and say, well, I've got a lot going on, but like what is adding value? What is causing strain on my life? Right? Like, okay, well, let me address those areas. So I think for me, there's always this like, mind, spiritual connection, I guess, mental connection with gardening, both physically in the garden and inwardly. I'm not sure if this is answering you.
No, and I like that you tied into working in healthcare, and then especially in the beginning of the pandemic, where you've probably seen a lot, not getting into HIPAA issues. You probably have seen a lot, and then you come home and something outside of the healthcare aspect, you're like, I put this work and effort into this thing that grows.
Yeah. And I think that that is really also what has spurred a lot of my interest in, yes, gardening, but also the nutritional aspect of taking care of yourself and whatnot. I did work during COVID, and then most recently I was working at a orthopedic hospital. I would see, it's a little bit of a tangent, sorry. But at the orthopedic hospital, I would see a lot of kind of comorbidities with patients that could be corrected or avoided with diet. You're seeing like a lot of obesity even in our younger generations, right? And you're seeing a lot of obesity, you're seeing a lot of joint inflammation and all of that. And so when I think about gardening, I'm like, well, it's great because you're growing food that's nutrient dense, you're feeding your body well, but then also just like the physical activity of getting out into your garden. Maybe you have to, kneel down to tend to your plants, or if you have raised planters, maybe you can stretch a little bit. So I think there are so many health benefits for gardening, and that is also part of my mission, just to get more people gardening.
No, and even for me, I'm a fitness instructor. I work with the youth and I work with adults, and I don't think a lot of people realize how integral installing these important factors into children, whether it's fitness or eating properly, impacts them when they're 20, they're 30, they're 40, they're 50.
Yes.
Like giving them that literacy to understand the importance
100%.
of, like, you need this, because if not, unfortunately, they do end up not being able to do certain things or having those comorbid. You said it properly, the words. But those are really integral. I think people just kind of like, here you go, give the kids whatever they want. I understand giving kids like the foods they like, but at the same time, you need to give them what they need to, like a plant, to help them grow.
And I think especially if you are exposing your children to, nutrient dense food, healthy organic food at an early age, like, I mean, from like the jump. I don't have kids, so
yeah.
Someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking like, hey, if you're exposing them to these fruits and vegetables and healthy foods right out of the gate, they are far more likely to want to prioritize those in their diet.
1000%.
Right. And then with actually having a garden, if someone decided that that's what they wanted to do, hopefully being able to include them in the process, right? Of including them in, oh, well, you like tomatoes. Okay, let's grow tomatoes. I always ask my clients, if they have kids, well, what vegetables did they like to grow or to like to eat? And then I like to incorporate those in the garden, so that way they can have a better understanding of, number one, where the food is coming from, right? Like I've met, some adults, no judgment at all, but I've met some adults that don't understand or did not realize that, like, oh, I didn't know broccoli came from a seed, right? Like, right. It's okay. No judgment if you didn't know that. But how cool would it be if we are teaching our children that at a very young age, like, hey, we have these fruits and vegetables. This is our food source. This is how it is actually grown. And then we can empower them to be able to grow their own food, right? Or if you're trying to introduce new fruits and vegetables to a diet, if they're involved in the process of growing it, right? Like, hey, we're going to go out to the garden. We're going to water the plants, and they get to spray the hose, and it's so fun. Okay, great. So now when it actually grows, like, hey, do you remember that little seed we planted? Why don't we try the fruit, right? And like, okay, because now they're invested, right? They've got some skin in the game. They've actually grown this thing with you. So I think that's so important. I would much rather empower, people in general, specifically I work with a lot of women, but I'd rather empower people in general to grow food, but also like long term, I'd really like to include children, right? Like understanding, giving them the tools, I guess, to grow their own food so that as they get older, they're like, oh, okay, like I have a clear understanding. Not everything just magically appears at the grocery store, right? It comes from somewhere. I'm empowered to grow my own if I decide to. And I think that's really important. I also think that would help as far as like the obesity problem that we have with our youth specifically. We have a lot of obesity within our children. And it would be nice to not have that by providing them nutrient-dense produce, by providing them with food that's actually going to nourish their body, give them what they need. I think that's really important. Actually, one of the patients that I saw was a child, right? And the child was taking Ozempic because for weight loss, right? When I looked at this kid, I was like, I mean, but he doesn't look obese. Like, why are we, and it's programs and now our parents, right? Like the adults in the world, oh, well, you have a weight problem. Let's just do Ozempic. I'm like, or we can just check out our diet, and see.
You know what's funny?
Room to improve.
You know what's funny? And it made me feel some type of way. I won't say the company's name, but I was watching this Super Bowl with my husband and his friends. And there was a commercial. I'm not sure if you've seen the commercial, where the commercial is just like, America has an obesity problem and how sometimes we're talked to and all these things. I'm like, yeah, as someone that works in fitness and healthcare, like, yes. Like, and then as it continued on, it was just like, how do we fix it? With kind of like an Ozempic style drug. I was like, no.
Yeah.
Like, what is happening? That's not the only. And as my mother who does have diabetes, and she's changed her lifestyle enough to where it's not as detectable anymore, and she has to monitor her diet. I'm just like,
right. And I'm not saying that, room for that for people that truly need it or
exactly
100%. I just think that there is this, trend of kind of abusing these medications or abusing other vices versus actually looking at what am I fueling my body with, right?
Exactly.
And if I'm looking at what I'm fueling my body with and it's all processed or it's all, or fat and not sort of like nutrient density, then like, okay, why don't we examine how can I get more fruits and veggies in my diet? Okay, well, do I buy them at the store? You can totally do that. Oh, well, shopping organic is so expensive. Okay, you're right. Do you want to grow some? Call me.
What obstacles have you faced either in business or personal growth, which we kind of touched base on, and how did you overcome them, if you've overcome them or you're still working through it?
Girl, I am 100% a work in progress by the grace of God. I got a lot to work on. I think my biggest problem right now, I'm not going to say it's doing too much. I would just say finding balance, right? So we talked a little bit earlier about I am a healthcare professional. So I work clinically, but now I've also started instructing. So I work clinically and I teach and I have my business and I'm married and we want to have kids eventually. So there's just like a lot going on. It's not too much, but it's a lot. So I think my biggest problem is just finding balance.
Yeah.
And understanding that part of finding that balance is something having to give a little bit. Right. So if it's like, hey, I'm really excited and, tomorrow I'm going to see 2 garden clients and I'm going to teach my class. Okay, well, that day I probably can't work clinically. Right. Like, it's just like finding that. Okay. Oh, well, I'm going to work clinically and I'm going to do something for school and I'm going to see 1 client virtually. Maybe I can't make dinner tonight. You know what I mean? So just finding that balance. I think solving that problem might be just eventually growing a team a little bit more. I do have a virtual assistant. Her name is Akira. She is incredible from the Southerly Social. I eventually would like probably to have more of like a local team and we're just not there yet. And that's okay. We'll get there. So, yeah.
As you said, the mustard seed, you're putting the mustard seed.
Yeah. And she does
girl. It's
growing.
growing. No, I understand. And it's something I've talked to my husband about.
Yeah.
The flu. I talked to my husband about, and just like, you have a lot on your plate and there's some things that just have to come off your plate.
Right.
In my early 20s, it's just very easy because you're just so quick at it and you're like, I don't have to rest. I don't have to do any of that.
Right, I'm fine.
I can bounce back so quickly.
Right. Let's do it all later. We got this.
As the older, more wiser you get, your body is now telling you, okay, you can't do what you did in your early 20s. This isn't it's not sustainable, and it's very hard.
Grace in that, like, it's okay.
Ooh.
You know, like it is completely okay to not be able to do everything that you were doing in your 20s, and it's okay to rest and pause. Kind of like we were talking about you know, being ill earlier. It's like, it's okay to just, you know what? The work will always be there, and we need to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anybody else or anything else, right? So yeah, I do think that just giving ourselves grace in those moments where you're like, hey, like, I know I really wanted to accomplish this today and it didn't happen, and that's okay, you know? So yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. Like, you, the 9-to-5 girly that's also doing yes, queen, I love to see it, but it's hard out here. It is hard. So giving ourselves grace in those moments, I think, is so important.
I love that. Giving yourself grace is really integral for you to moving forward. So from challenges and lessons learned into faith-based perspectives on environmental stewardship. So how do you believe personal healing is connected to the healing of our environment?
How do I believe personal healing is connected to the healing of our environment? I'll say the first thing that comes to mind is, I'm not actually sure if you're talking about our environment like the earth, but for me, I'm actually thinking about the environment of like our personal surroundings.
Yes. Either or, yes.
And I think that for me, and this, I don't know how related it is to gardening, but I think the more that I prioritize my healing in areas where I've been hurt or areas that have not gone well and things like that, the more I am conscious enough with myself to work through that, you know, through therapy, through prayer, through whatever it is, the better I can show up in my environment. And so I think that that is what helps with the healing of the environment, right? So for instance, we're going to go back a little bit again to COVID. I'm working in the hospital. So working in the hospital, I'm not happy. You know, dark, depressed, stressed, all of the things, not healed, right? In that moment, working on something through gardening. But as I'm coming home to my direct environment, my home, right, with my husband, I was grumpy, right? Like, I'm grumpy, I'm tired, I'm burnt out. And that's not who I am. Like, I know that we are just kind of getting to know each other, but I am a sweetheart. Like,
I can tell.
Okay, but the girl back then,
there was a lot of pressure and stress. You have to put on a good brave face at work.
It was a lot of pressure and stress. And so I wasn't able to show up in my environment as myself, as the sweetheart, right? As someone that's loving and nurturing and all of that. So the more that I was able to prioritize my own personal healing, I was able to kind of heal that environment as well and show up to cultivate a loving and supportive environment. I don't know if that makes sense. And like I said, I don't know.
No, it does make sense. No, 1000%. It's kind of like what you bring home. It's kind of like you put a mask on when you're at work. And then it's just like, you come home, you're just like, thank God I can take the mask off, but not realizing when you do take it off, you're impacting the people in the environment, whether it's your cat or your husband or your parents or your sister. It does impact everything, and that can impact how you feel about gardening. Like, it's like, I contributed to cooking. Yeah, like, you can tell when you're having a bad day and you're cooking, and you're like, ooh, the food tastes a little Cajun style, because your environment is impacting how you're feeling in that moment.
I do feel that way about gardening too, because I feel like the times where my garden is not looking that great, like I peek out there, I was like, oh, I need to do some cleanup out there, right? It's probably because I've got too much going on in my personal life and I haven't made it a priority to go out there to garden. I was actually saying on my TikTok the other day, like, so I normally go out to my garden at least every day. Well, at least 3 times a week. The goal is every day. I don't have to go out there every day in a sense that, like, I have an irrigation system and it'll stay watered. But either way, I try to go out every day. And I was in this season in January where I just didn't go out as often because it was cold. I don't know if you remember that, like, little cold.
Oh, yeah, that cold spiel where it's kind of like you needed a jacket.
And it was like 35 or something. I'm like, okay, like, I, at this point, am a Florida girly. I need 80s, right? So I'm like, you know, bundled up inside looking at my garden like, it's 35. I'm going to just put a blanket on them. It'll be okay. So I hadn't really been out into my garden. And I finally went out there. And because I hadn't been out, I'd say maybe in like a week, there was things that were like just growing, like really, you know, so I'm like, okay, I'm harvesting a bunch of collard greens. I've got green beans, all this stuff. And I really like felt God kind of talking to me. That's kind of one of the reasons why I love being out in the garden. I feel like it's just peace and quiet and I can like receive a word from God. And another Bible verse kind of popped in my head. It was like, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. And I'm like, dang, like if I would have just done the work, right? If I would have just done the work to come out here, be intentional, harvest from my garden, like there was plenty for me to harvest, right? And it's the same thing with like doing like your inner healing, your personal healing, right? Like if I could just take the time to prioritize addressing the areas in my life that need work, if I could do that, then like the harvest is plenty. I'll be so much better off in my life. There's so many things that God has for me if I would just be willing to put in the work to work on myself, I guess. So yeah, I think your personal journey of healing 100% affects like our healing of our environment, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's really integral in your faith, especially with spiritual wellness and environmental wellness, which I don't think a lot of people put together a lot.
Yeah, I think especially just like the journey of a plant and seeing it go from seed, literally like the whole life cycles, going it from, you know, a seed to a seedling to a full plant and then dying essentially. Like it's deep. Gardening is deep. It's not just about the garden. Like it's about like the soil. It's about, you know, the nurturing environment of the soil. You think about that. One of the things that comes up a lot with clients that already have gardens and they're like, you know, kind of wanting me to give my input of their garden. A lot of times it starts in the soil, right? I'm like, hey, like you actually don't have enough, you know, nutrients in your soil. It's not quality soil. So when you're trying to grow something, immediately dies, right? Or you're trying to grow something and it's like, oh, it's not doing as well. Or how come my plants aren't as large as yours? I'm like, well, I've taken a lot of time to use nutrient dense soil that has everything that my plant needs in it, right? And so I again kind of relate that to like my personal life, right? I'm like, so if we're talking about foundation of like who is Mikayla, you know, who is Brittany? If we're looking at the soil of like our life, right? What's in the soil? Do we have the nutrients that we need to be a great wife or to be a great friend? You know, have we addressed the trauma that we have in our life to free us up to grow strong roots within our community? Things like that. Like, I think there are so many, like, I guess, you know, connections that you can make between gardening and spirituality or gardening and your personal life. There's so much to it. So that's what
and look, people thought they're like, oh, she just does gardening. No.
Girl.
She's a multifaceted girlie. We do not everything because we don't burn ourselves out. We do what we can to make the environment and spiritual wellness the best part of everyone's existence, including ourselves. Moving on from that to the role of a personal gardens in promoting eco-friendly habits. Personal gardens aren't just pretty, and through our conversation, they are powerful. Are eco-friendly lifestyles only accessible to privileged communities? And if so, do you have any possible ideas of how that can change?
No, I think so. Our eco-friendly communities, are they only accessible to, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, no. So are eco-friendly lifestyles only accessible to privileged communities? People probably that live like in nicer communities can probably compare it to other communities that may not have the access to certain things.
I think that that's such a common misconception. I think that we can have some more eco-friendly like principles within a wide variety of communities. I think what it has to do with is maybe just being a little bit more creative, right? So if I'm thinking about, for instance, I'm going to start seeds, right? Maybe in a more privileged, I suppose, community that looks like, well, I'm going to go and just buy all of my seeds, like my vegetables from a nursery, and maybe it might be expensive or whatever. But if I'm in a community that I don't have access to those types of things, whether it be, you know, financially or just literally there's nowhere around for me to purchase these things, you can easily get, you know, seed packets, and maybe you don't have the fancy seed starting tray, but we can use like the toilet paper rolls. Have you seen what is it? It's like the cardboard part, right?
Cardboard. Yeah, I had them I do Zumba Kids, and we for STEM week last month. They have the little cardboard tubes.
I was so excited.
And like put the little balloon, and they would shoot like little rocket launchers.
Yeah.
They loved it. It was so fun.
The same thing like that. You can repurpose materials like that and start seeds, right? We can fill that with soil and put our seeds there, right? So I think that as far as being in a community that maybe doesn't have the same access that another one does, like it's just about the creativity, right? I think that eco-friendly practices and, you know, potentially growing food or being more sustainable is completely achievable regardless of your environment, I guess. It's just different of how you might achieve that, the way to get there. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think having those small things, it gives people, again, that sense of hope that you were talking about earlier, of just like, it may be small, but
Mhm.
it's impactful. It's powerful, and especially if it's for small children and teenagers who don't
Right.
understand, and they
Right.
can understand that as they grow up, that they have the power in whatever they do.
Right. And even if it's, oh, well, I relate everything to gardening, right? But if it's, oh, well, I want to garden, but I don't have a gardening hose, or it's too expensive to water the garden. Okay, well, we can do things like rain barrels, right? So we can get a giant jug, you can make your own, and collect rainwater. It rains all the time here in Florida, right? Let's collect the rainwater and we'll just use that to water the garden. That makes a lot of sense. So I think it's just a matter of like, using the resources that you do have available to you versus, really harping on the things that you don't have available to you. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense, because sometimes when you focus on the negative,
Right.
unfortunately, you get
Right.
negative outcomes where
Right.
if you're like, I see the glass is more half full than empty, you may get a little bit more. I like the rain barrel idea. That's actually a really good idea. I didn't even think of that.
I think that if you are motivated enough, like almost kind of like if there's a will, there's a way type of thing, right? Like I think that it is a common misconception that you have to have some sort of access, like it's a privilege. It is to be able to, have eco-friendly practices and grow your own food and all this stuff. Like it is a privilege, but it's not exclusive, right? Like it's a right that all of us should have access to. You know what I mean?
No, that makes 1,000% sense. Again, those tips are awesome. And again, if people were listening, I was like, you can take some of these tips for yourself. But also, you can contact Mikayla to get.
I'm here, girl.
Well, plug the businesses. Plug the businesses.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
And moving on from that from your perspective, how do you envision cities of the future integrating green spaces for both environmental and spiritual well-being?
What I would love is I could totally see more businesses and schools and things like that having gardens available, even if it's like, hey, I'm working at a hospital and we have a meditation garden, right? More than that, what I would love is a vegetable garden, because that could be like productive for, patient care and all that stuff. But I think that, moving forward, I could 100% see, or would like to see, just more gardens really everywhere, whether it be like at your kids' preschool, right? Like we teach kids, what is it, Montessori learning,
Yeah.
where they learn like everything. I mean, not everything, but they learn like life skills, right? Like when they're like 3 years old, you have like a 2-year-old knowing how to sweep, right? I'm like, okay, well, why don't we implement a green space there, right? And teach the 2-year-old how to water a seed, right? Like that's a great skill. That's a life skill, right? Or like, why don't we implement them in high schools, right? I think that some of the local high schools here actually have gardening programs where they learn how to grow food and whatnot. But yeah, having more, honestly, like I know a green space feels very broad in terms of like, oh, it's green, right? But like, I really think having more vegetable gardens specifically could be very beneficial to our community. Just having access to food. Like imagine you're working your 9 to 5. Do you work in like an office?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, same. So imagine you're working your 9 to 5 and there is a dedicated employee garden outside. Specific vegetable garden, right? And you're like, oh, well, I didn't pack my lunch today. I'm just going to take a walk in the garden. You go out to the garden and there's salad greens, right? And you're like, yeah, hey, I didn't pack my lunch and this is an employee garden. I'm just going to pick some salad greens and why don't I make a salad for lunch? Like, how freaking cool would that be? You know what I mean?
Honestly, that would be amazing. Like if I'm hungry and there's the apples or a particular vegetable or fruit for snack time, I could take it back and cut it up and eat in the office.
Oh, we have an orange tree in our, community, our employee garden. I'm gonna go pick an orange and I'll go back to my desk. Like what if organizations, companies, whatever you want to call them, what if they prioritize gardens and access to healthy food in a way that was prioritizing employee well-being, right? Like what if we had these green spaces, these vegetable gardens, even if they're small, right? And it was available to employees to take a moment, even if it's, maybe you're not the person that's going to go out there and pick lettuce. Fine. Maybe that's not your jam. But you could go out there and listen to wind chime and sit there and read your book on your break. And you know what I mean? Like, and have just like a moment of peace.
At least have the option to do it.
Right.
At least.
Going back to your desk. So I think that there is so much room for green spaces, for vegetable gardens and all of that within our workplace. And I think Even like I said, just bringing it into what kids are learning within their communities and their schools, and ultimately just kind of getting back to having those green spaces in your own environment. Even if you're in an apartment, okay, like that's okay. Why don't we have something on our little balcony? That's actually how I started growing. I started my garden on my townhouse patio, right?
Oh.
So it's like, I think that the more that we can kind of get back to that and prioritize the benefits of having green spaces, the effects on your mental health, the effects on, you know, your nutrition, all of those things just would be so beneficial, I think, to society as a whole, and feeling connected more to nature. I think being connected to nature can just help quiet your mind, even for, you know, a couple seconds.
No.
We'd probably be better off for it, you know?
My husband tries to, he's like, let's go meditate. I'm like, why? He's like, just
Gosh, yeah.
just
It's hard.
come one with the earth. Again, that's like the Taurus in him, just like, let's just come one with the earth. Let's be calm. Let's be center. And I look at him like, I would do.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know about this.
But when I do become, I think it's like the fear of being in connection with your emotions and your feelings, because like kind of, I know for myself, I can't speak for other people, like, once you're kind of in connection with your body and your emotions, sometimes you're just like, yeah, I'm done for the day.
Yeah,
I'm feeling all the emotions. It's exhausting.
Like being forced to like face the reality of like, this is what it is. But I also think society would be better for that, right? Because we would be, you know, forced in some sort of way to just think about, you know, the things that we don't want to address. And then in those moments when you're just sitting in your green space and you're just sitting with yourself, you're like, okay, well, maybe that's not so bad, you know, like, or maybe this is a way that I can address this issue that I've been putting off, or even just gaining different perspective. I think for me, specifically with like green spaces or, you know, my personal garden or whatever, I really enjoy that it's so quiet, because it just forces me to quiet my mind, essentially. Me being still enough to hear what it is that I guess I'm thinking about. But even more than that, I also, connecting to the spiritual part, like that's where I feel like I can hear the most from God, because it literally is so quiet. Like I'm in my garden, I'm not on my phone, I'm not blasting music. Sometimes I do, but for the most part, it's my plants, and you're hearing the wind, and you're hearing the whoosh on the leaves, and it's like, you know, and the birds chirping, and then the pool fountain, and it just forces you to just be like, wow, like this is literally nature, you know. And you hear like, I don't know, I'm like, oh, well, and I hear like my thoughts essentially passing in the winds, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that I said I was going to do that. And I'm like, oh, all right, you know. I think it's important too, for sure.
No, I think it's really important. But I think you've worked with probably so many people through your business. Without giving who the person would be, is there any one particular story that stands out to you where you saw the healing power of plants made a difference in somebody else's life?
I would say I had a client that had already been gardening for a while, and she was getting kind of discouraged because she wasn't able to grow like enough for like her whole family, right? She's like, I'm growing things, but it's not enough, right? Like I have like not a big enough harvest to feed my family. And so being able to work with her and see the change in her garden, with the different things that we implemented, and, you know, her sending me pictures of, you know, giant zucchini, and like, you know, she's, oh, I did it. You know what I mean? Like it's like able to really like feed my family with this nutrient dense produce. Like, I think that is just so rewarding to see, and see their excitement as they're able to incorporate, you know, their kids and, you know, into the mix and things. Yeah, I think though that's really exciting. And then also getting to see families kind of work together on the garden. If it's like, hey, we don't have a garden yet, but we're gonna, you know, work with me and create this garden. Getting to see those pictures of like, oh, you know, saw Johnny, we'll call him, you know, saw Johnny in the garden, and he's harvesting his tomatoes today. I'm like, oh, that's so great. Like, this is something that you guys are now getting to do together, you know, and getting to sit down. I love, oh my gosh, I can't believe I never even mentioned this so far, but getting able to like really just sit down at the family table and like share the fruit of your labor with your family. Like it is unreal. Like it is, I mean, you know, Christmas dinners, Thanksgiving dinners, even just a regular Tuesday night. So getting to hear those stories too, of like, hey, you know, like we just had all our family over and we fed them from the garden. I'm like, yes, like you're doing it.
And especially if it's like during like a holiday, then like you're a part of their celebration.
Yeah.
You've helped them establish a new tradition probably moving forward.
Yeah. Dude, collard greens are my favorite thing to grow for the holidays.
Are they?
Yeah, I just kind of like I grew up eating collard greens, like, for Thanksgiving and things. And I actually didn't really like them until I was an adult. Like, I don't know. As a kid, I was like, oh, slimy. But as an adult, I was like, oh, okay, my mom put some red pepper flakes in it this time, like it's good. And so being able to now transform that into like, here, mom, I grew these, right? And there's this bushel of collard greens from my garden. She's like, oh my gosh, okay. And now I'm getting, the phone calls of like, hey, so we're having Christmas dinner. What are you bringing from the garden? I'm like, oh, okay, well, this year you're getting salad, so yeah, like I think that not only experiencing that myself, but being able to empower other people to have those experiences, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you grew this. And you're like, yo, do you want to learn? Like, we can teach you too, So I think that's a huge thing that makes me very happy, I guess, to see clients experience that for themselves. Because it's not just me telling you like, hey, you can grow your own food. It's like, no, you're experiencing this and you're getting to share it with your family, which is like the ultimate goal for sure.
%. What kind of legacy do you want to leave for the planet, and how does it reflect our spiritual beliefs of today? It doesn't have to be the world, but your spiritual beliefs.
Yeah.
Does it impact the future?
Yeah, I think the legacy that I would like to leave would be just giving people access to, healthy food, and giving them not even the access, but like the tools and the knowledge to continue teaching, their children and their children's children. And maybe I'm not trying to like empower a whole group of farmers, but it would be nice to just get back to like the root of everyone growing something. The legacy I'd like to leave would be just making gardening achievable and accessible for everyone. I think that as far as the spirituality part of it, I think that at the end of the day, because I am so passionate about, health and wellness and gardening, I want to be able to look at my life and say, I did everything that I could with the gifts God has given me, right? If God has given me the gift of, relating to people and, a gentle spirit and a patient spirit to be able to teach people how to grow, I just want to be able to say that I did everything that I could with the tools, the knowledge, the gifts, the abilities that God has given me. Yeah, I think that would be how I would answer that.
No, that's fabulous. And again, kind of piggybacking off of the question of like the stories of you impacting with your business, of people sitting in creating community amongst themselves, of passing that on to children, passing that on to where they understand that it's just not something that just arrives at a truck. And
right,
we live in Florida at the Publix,
or everything comes from Publix.
Everything comes from something. There's a foundation. Everything comes from something. And that's honestly something you can't just teach. You have to actually feel and do.
Right.
And that's something you may not realize. It's really integral to another human being's spiritual wellness and environmental wellness. But Miss Mikayla, I want to give you a round of applause. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you. Where can the people follow you?
So my Instagram is @plantedprayer. That is actually across the board on all social platforms, on Instagram, TikTok. My website is plantedprayer.com. If you'd like to book a discovery call with me, we can chat about your garden goals, all of that. Yeah, I am on YouTube as well, but I'm very new there. So if you go there at this point and there's not a lot, don't judge me. We're working on it. But the social platform for that as well is @plantedprayer. So yeah, connect with me, get on my email list. I have garden tips that I send out once a week. I'm always doing things around the community. Sometimes I'll do like farmers markets and things like that. So
that's how I met you.
I know. So yeah, I think that, just connecting on my Instagram or on my website would be a great way for you to find me.
Awesome. Thank you, Mikayla.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I can't wait to, when my husband and I are in better moods, cannot wait to book you, because we got our backyard fenced in finally.
Amazing.
And so the next step is to start getting the gardening done.
Yeah,
and
whatever
we
you
still have
need.
your business card and everything.
Yeah, so. Whatever you need. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was truly a pleasure.